What if desire, that very force which drives our existence, was actually the root of our deepest suffering? Nietzsche didn't view desire as something pure or romantic, but as a power that drags us forward, placing us face to face with absence, dissatisfaction, and inevitably pain. For him, to desire means recognizing that something is missing from us, and that absence is never completely filled. Pleasure, when it arrives, is fleeting. Frustration, when it settles in, endures. Yet we persist in chasing what can never be fully grasped. But is the problem with desire itself, or with how we relate to it? Is it possible to transform this painful energy into creative power, rather than condemnation and suffering? Nietzsche didn't write to comfort, but to tear away illusions. He invites us to look within and perceive how desire enslaves us, promises paradises that never materialize, yet keeps us in constant motion. This reflection isn't comfortable, but it's liberating. If you've ever wondered why you never feel fully satisfied, even when you achieve what you want, this is the moment to dive deeper. If this journey resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and follow every step of this dark and transformative reflection. Nietzsche provokes us to think of desire not as something magnificent, but as an open wound. To desire means acknowledging that something is lacking in us, that we aren't whole, that there's a void to be filled. Therefore, desire is always testimony to our incompleteness. It doesn't spring from abundance, but from scarcity. When someone desires love, it's because they feel the absence of affection. When they seek recognition, it's because they don't feel validated. When they pursue wealth, it's because poverty or internal insecurity screams louder. Desire is therefore the silent confession that we're not yet what we'd like to be. Nietzsche viewed this movement with suspicion, for in it he perceived a dangerous cycle. The more we desire, the more we confirm our lack, and the more we confirm the lack, the more dependent on it we become. It's like a thirst that's never quenched. We drink, find relief for an instant, but soon feel the same dryness. Desire never gives us rest. It presents itself as a promise of wholeness, but delivers only temporary relief, which soon dissolves back into the same void from which it came. Look at simple everyday situations. The child anxiously awaiting a birthday present imagines that once they have that toy, they'll find lasting joy. But a few days later, the charm disappears and the desire for something new emerges. The adult dreaming of a work promotion believes they'll find fulfillment there, but when the position finally arrives, they realize the inner restlessness continues. It's just changed form. The couple in love who project onto each other salvation from their solitude discover, after the enchantment phase, that the void persists, that no human love can completely redeem their anguish. Nietzsche wasn't moralistic enough to condemn desire as sin, but was realistic enough to see in it an existential trap. To desire is to live in constant tension, in permanent dissatisfaction, always in debt to oneself and the world. Desire promises a better tomorrow, but what it actually does is shift our attention from the present to a future that never arrives. It keeps us running like someone chasing a shadow, always believing the next conquest will finally bring peace. But that peace never comes. And here lies the cruelty of desire. It makes us believe life is postponed. We never live fully because we're always waiting for something. Desire is life's delay, the belief that only later, after the ideal body, after the perfect relationship, after enough money, will we actually be able to exist. Nietzsche saw in this postponement a kind of cultural disease, the inability to affirm the present, to live the moment, because we're bewitched by what we don't yet have. But there's also a turning point. Desire, by revealing lack, also shows the intensity of life pulsing within us. The void we feel isn't just a curse, it's also a calling. It shows we're still alive, that something in us doesn't conform to what's given. The problem isn't desire itself, but how we relate to it. If we take it as master, we become slaves to infinite absence. But if we see it as a force, as a sign of vitality, perhaps we can transform it into something more. Nietzsche didn't want us to deny desire, but to perceive its root, lack. Because only when we recognize this wound can we decide what to do with it. If we ignore it, we chase ghosts. If we confront it, we can begin to create meaning. Thus, the first step is accepting that to desire is to confess incompleteness. The void is real, but it doesn't need to be only a burden. It can become fertile ground from which new possibilities are born. Desire reminds us that we're beings in motion, that we haven't reached the end of our story. It is suffering, yes, but it's also hidden power, waiting to be awakened. Nietzsche saw in pleasure a cruel paradox. It's intense but ephemeral, overwhelming but fleeting. Every pleasure born from desire is in essence a flash, a spark that shines and quickly fades. What remains isn't satisfaction, but the trace of lack. Therefore, desiring always leads to suffering, because the promise of wholeness is disproportionate to what we actually receive when we conquer the object of our wanting. Desire promises the infinite, but delivers only seconds of relief. Think of the moment when someone receives news they've been accepted for a highly competitive job. The heart races, the mind explodes in euphoria. The sensation of victory seems to justify all sacrifices. However, this feeling doesn't last long. Within weeks, perhaps days, work becomes routine, worries return, anxiety about meeting expectations replaces initial euphoria. The pleasure that seemed to open doors to happiness disappears, and restlessness returns in its place. The pain of dissatisfaction lasts much longer than the moment of conquest. Nietzsche realized this logic is present in all aspects of life. Sexual desire, for example, is an overwhelming force. It grows in absence, in waiting, in idealizing the encounter. But when climax arrives, the body finds only momentary relief. What seemed to promise eternity proves too brief. Soon after, the same void returns, the same need, the same necessity to repeat the cycle. It's as if desire mocks us, offering a sip of water to someone thirsting in the desert, a sip that only increases the thirst. This contrast between brief pleasure and lasting pain creates a life in permanent instability. We constantly oscillate between fleeting moments of satisfaction and long periods of lack. This is why Nietzsche saw in desire not just a vital force, but also poison. It keeps us alive, but also corrodes us. Pain isn't accidental, it's structural. It's not a matter of bad luck or destiny, but the very nature of desiring. To desire is to condemn oneself to pleasure's brevity and suffering's extension. And this trap is reinforced by how we project pleasure. Human beings tend to overvalue what they don't yet have. Before conquest, we imagine it will bring something grand, almost absolute. We create expectations that magnify the desired object far beyond its reality. That's why pleasure, when it finally comes, always disappoints. It doesn't match the image we built in our minds. Fantasy is greater than reality. Nietzsche denounces this illusion as one of humanity's great sources of suffering. We create gods of pleasure in our imagination and become frustrated when we discover they're made of clay. Consider someone who dreams of a trip. For months, they create images of perfect scenery, moments of intense happiness, transformative experiences. But when the trip happens, between beautiful photos and some pleasant moments, there are also lines, delays, setbacks, arguments, fatigue. The pleasure of real experience never reaches the ideal of expectation, and so, upon returning, the person feels empty again, already planning the next trip. The cycle repeats as if we're eternally condemned to chase something that never allows itself to be completely reached. Nietzsche doesn't invite us to abandon pleasure, but to see it in its true proportion. Pleasure isn't a promise of eternity, but just a moment of intensity. Suffering arises precisely when we try to make it absolute. We want it to last forever. We want it to fill us completely. But this expectation is impossible. Pleasure is like lightning illuminating the night. It shines bright, cuts through darkness, but disappears in seconds, leaving darkness again. The philosopher provokes us to realize that life, if lived only in pursuit of pleasure, will always be a sequence of frustrations. One who chases pleasure as a goal will find only an ever-growing void, because pleasure doesn't sustain itself. It's dependent on desire, and desire, as we've seen, is always lack. Therefore, living for pleasure is living for lack. However, Nietzsche also perceived something essential. Pain doesn't need to be just a burden. Suffering that extends, if accepted and faced, can transform into depth. Pleasure's brevity forces us to look at what truly remains. And what remains is pain. It's in pain that we can find ourselves, understand ourselves, forge inner strength. Pleasure distracts us. Pain teaches us. This is why Nietzsche valued pain more than pleasure. Not because he was a pessimist, but because he knew pain is lasting, and what lasts forms us. Pleasure touches us, but doesn't transform us. Suffering marks us, tears us from superficiality, forces us to reinvent ourselves. Those who seek only pleasure remain on life's surface. Those who learn to deal with pain dive into its depth. Thus, the lesson Nietzsche offers is harsh but liberating. We shouldn't expect pleasure to solve our existence. It's part of the game, but not the center. If we place in it the promise of happiness, we'll reap only frustration. The path isn't to flee from pleasure, but to recognize its brevity, not demand from it what it cannot give. Pleasure should be lived intensely, but without the illusion that it can fulfill us. What truly builds us isn't brief euphoria, but how we deal with the pain that remains after pleasure goes away. Brief pleasure and lasting pain reveal the human condition in all its fragility. To desire is to seek relief, but to live is to learn to bear lack. Nietzsche reminds us that perhaps true wisdom doesn't lie in collecting pleasures, but in learning to dance with pain. For only then do we stop being slaves to an impossible promise and become creators of meaning amid emptiness. Nietzsche saw in desire a mechanism that never stops turning. No matter how much we conquer, there will always be something beyond, always a new target, always another object of desire. This is the vicious circle of wanting, an infinite chain of searches that never conclude. Deep down, each conquest isn't the end of a journey, but just the beginning of a new lack. To desire is to live in eternal repetition. Think of someone who dedicates years of their life to buying their own home. They work, save, make sacrifices. When they finally enter the new house, the pleasure of conquest explodes in euphoria. But it doesn't take long for new desires to emerge. Renovating the kitchen, changing furniture, building a leisure area. The house, which seemed to be the final dream, transforms into just another stage. What was once a goal becomes a starting point for other dissatisfactions. The wheel turns again. This movement is so natural we hardly notice it. We want something, suffer for not having it, conquer it, feel pleasure for a brief moment, and soon return to desiring. The problem isn't wanting, but the fact that wanting never exhausts itself. It's as if life were a labyrinth with no exit, where each open door reveals another closed one ahead. Nietzsche saw in this one of humanity's great tragedies. Desire doesn't lead us to wholeness, but to eternal restart. He provokes us to reflect. Do we really want what we desire, or do we just desire to desire? Perhaps what moves us isn't conquest itself, but the movement of always being in search. It's like an addiction. Victory's pleasure is so brief that what remains is the need to pursue again. Desiring becomes habit, compulsion, prison. Observe the behavior of someone constantly seeking new romantic relationships. The beginning, with its intensity, with the sensation of discovery and passion, seems to offer renewed meaning to life. But when the relationship stabilizes, when desire begins to lose its initial force, the person feels restless again and looks for another passion. It's not love they truly seek, but the desire to desire. The initial flame matters more than building continuity. Nietzsche understood this logic is dangerous because it creates a cycle of permanent dissatisfaction. We live always projected forward, hoping the next step will finally complete us. But that step is never the last. There will always be another and another and yet another. This movement steals our present. We're so busy chasing the future that we forget to live now. The vicious circle of wanting also manifests in social conquests. Think of someone who achieves political power. The initial desire might just be to be elected, to conquer a position. But once in office, victory's pleasure soon gives way to new desires, staying in power, climbing positions, expanding influence. It's never enough. Power has no limit, and neither does desire for it. This is why so many men and women in power end up enslaved by their own ambition. They believed they were conquering freedom, but ended up trapped in invisible chains. Nietzsche alerts us, desire when lived naively becomes a wheel that spins us endlessly, and the more we run inside it, the more exhausted we become, never getting anywhere. It's like the animal in its cage, running without realizing it's going nowhere. Desire's promise is always movement, but the result is always repetition. But what to do faced with this cycle? Nietzsche didn't believe in simplistic solutions like simply denying desire. Repressing will doesn't destroy it, it just transforms it into resentment. The path isn't to abandon wanting, but to learn to look at it directly, understand its logic, perceive its traps, and then consciously choose how to live with it. One possibility is accepting desire as vital force, but not as destiny. Recognizing the wheel turns, but not being fooled by the promise that the next turn will bring final rest. It's seeing the circle, but deciding to dance within it. Nietzsche called this amor fati, love of one's own destiny, of one's own condition. Not fleeing the mechanism, but affirming its existence. It's at this point that the vicious circle of wanting can transform into a creative circle. Instead of chasing desires that empty themselves, we can use this energy to create, to shape the world, to surpass ourselves. Desire stops being a chain when we stop being its slaves and begin using it as fuel. What was once blind repetition can become conscious movement. Nietzsche invites us therefore not to deny the circle, but to understand it. Wanting never ends, and perhaps it should never end. It's what keeps life pulsing, what tears us from inertia, what makes us go beyond. The mistake is believing that at some point it will resolve itself. It won't. There will always be more to desire. The secret isn't breaking the cycle, but transforming its logic. Instead of seeking the illusory peace of final satisfaction, embracing the infinite dance of wanting. Thus, desire's vicious circle can stop being prison and become path. No longer running like slaves after mirages, but walking like creators who make lack itself an inexhaustible source of strength. Nietzsche reminds us that life isn't about reaching an end, but about living movement, and desire with all its weight is the engine of that movement. For Nietzsche, desire is never neutral. It doesn't arise merely as will to fill an absence, but also as expression of a deeper force, the will to power. This means that often what we desire isn't really the object itself, but the power we believe it will give us. Desire in this sense is also an illusion, a mask hiding a more primitive instinct. When someone desires to be loved, for example, they don't seek just affection or companionship. They also seek the sensation of importance, of being recognized, of occupying a special space in another's heart. Love, in this case, is crossed by a need for power, the power to be indispensable. Similarly, when someone desires wealth, what's really at stake isn't just material comfort, but the influence, authority, and freedom that money promises to offer. The object of desire is just the vehicle. What hides behind it is always the urge to affirm oneself over the world. Nietzsche saw this as a trap, because desire's illusion makes us believe we seek happiness, when we actually seek dominion. We don't just like having, but having more than others. We're not satisfied just with achieving, but with surpassing. Desire is comparative, competitive, always marked by measuring against others. That's why it generates so much anguish, because it's rooted in comparison, and comparison never ends. There will always be someone with more. There will always be something beyond. This movement appears clearly in human relationships. In love, we project the idea that the other will be our salvation, but often what we seek is the power to possess and be possessed, to control and be controlled. Nietzsche mocked romanticism because he saw in it a convenient lie. We call love what is, deep down, a struggle of forces. The desire for fusion is also the desire for dominion. Similarly, in the pursuit of success, what moves us isn't just achieving, but being seen. The desire for recognition is the desire for power over gazes. We want the world to applaud us, to confirm our importance, but when we get that applause, we realize it's brief, and soon the need for more arises. Power is a bottomless well. Nietzsche didn't condemn this will because he saw it as an essential part of life. The will to power is existence's engine, what makes us grow, create, expand. The problem arises when we don't recognize this instinct and cover it with illusions. When we call love what is control, when we call happiness what is dispute, we fall into error and end up suffering even more. Therefore, the Nietzschean invitation is for lucidity, to see desire in its intimate relationship with power, to admit that what we seek isn't just pleasure, but affirmation, and from this truth to consciously decide how to deal with this force. Because power can enslave us in endless games, but it can also propel us to create, transform, give shape to life's chaos. The challenge, then, isn't to deny desire, but to unmask it. Remove from it the illusions that make it prison, and see in it the will to power that can become creation. Only then do we stop living deceived by desire's false shine and begin transforming its energy into something that truly affirms life. Nietzsche never defended that human beings eliminate desire. For him, denying this force would be the same as denying life itself. Desire is inevitable, part of our condition. But we can choose what we do with it. If we let it dominate us, we become slaves to a cycle of frustration and pain. If we learn to transform it, it converts into creative power. This is the Nietzschean challenge. Transmute desire's weight into affirmative force. The secret lies in changing focus. Instead of living just running after external objects, love, success, recognition, power, we can direct desire toward creating ourselves. The void we feel can be interpreted not as condemnation, but as invitation. Each lack is a possibility to give form to something new. Desire, instead of being just a search for satisfaction, can become a source of expression. A simple example: someone who suffers from desiring recognition can choose to transform that suffering into work. Instead of depending on external applause, they can use lack's energy to create something authentic: a text, a painting, an idea, a project. Desire doesn't disappear, but converts into fuel. What was once deficiency becomes a production engine. Nietzsche called this movement transvaluation, taking what hurts us and giving it new value. Desire, which seemed like prison, can become liberation if we put it at creation's service. This is the same principle we find in artists, philosophers, thinkers, all those who transformed their pains and lacks into works that surpassed their own lives. What for many would be unbearable suffering, for them became a source of beauty and strength. But this transformation requires courage. It's much easier to remain in the incessant search for quick pleasures than to face the pain of emptiness and give it new meaning. Nietzsche knew most prefer the comfort of illusion, but believed those who dare to cross through pain find much deeper freedom. The freedom of not depending on the desired object, but creating from lack itself. This is the difference between the reactive man and the creator. The first is led by desire, always reacting to his absences. The second affirms desire, recognizes its force, but decides what to do with it. He doesn't flee from lack, but assumes it as part of life, and in it finds creation's spark. Transforming desire into creative force is therefore accepting suffering as raw material. The void will never disappear, but it can be molded. Its pain becoming music, its solitude becoming philosophy, its anguish becoming poetry. Instead of asking life to satisfy us, we begin responding to life by creating. Nietzsche invites us finally not to wait for desire to complete us, but to use it as energy to reinvent ourselves. The suffering of wanting doesn't need to be a burden. It can be the flame that lights our capacity to create, transform, and affirm life in all its intensity. Nietzsche didn't want us to free ourselves from desire, as some philosophical and religious traditions propose, but to learn to live with it lucidly. Desire is inevitable, an essential part of life, but it doesn't need to dominate us. There's wisdom in desiring without becoming a slave, in welcoming this force without being dragged by its illusions. Being a slave to desire means living in function of something that always escapes. It's putting one's own life on hold, waiting for the next pleasure, the next conquest, the next person to finally bring the peace that never comes. It's remaining blind to pleasure's fleeting nature and lacks permanent restlessness. Nietzsche alerts us that in this state we don't live, we merely postpone life. True wisdom lies in affirming desire without depending on it. This means recognizing it as vital force, allowing it to move us, but without believing it's capable of giving us completeness. When we desire consciously, we accept that pleasure will be brief and lack will return. We don't fool ourselves with promises of eternity. And precisely because of this, we manage to live each moment more intensely, because we know nothing is definitive. Think of someone who desires love. If they believe love will be salvation, they'll easily fall into frustration, demanding from the other the impossible, completely filling their absence. But if they desire love with lucidity, knowing no relationship can solve existence's void, then they can live that relationship more freely, more honestly, more fully. They won't seek slavery, but encounter. Desire, in this case, doesn't imprison, but enriches. The same logic applies to other areas of life. Those who desire success as guarantee of happiness will always live anxiously, but those who seek it as opportunity for creative expression can transform it into growth experience. Desire doesn't disappear, but stops being master and becomes ally. Nietzsche believed this posture is an act of inner strength. It requires courage to admit we'll never be complete, that emptiness will accompany us until the end. Wisdom isn't in denying this, but in living despite it. Desiring without being slave is loving life in its imperfection, accepting the game without demanding it be perfect. It's here that amor fati enters, love of destiny, saying yes, not just to pleasure, but also to pain, not just to presence, but also to lack. Thus, Nietzschean wisdom is a kind of reconciliation with the human condition. Desiring will always mean suffering, but this suffering doesn't need to be prison. It can become a path of creation, intensity, freedom. Desire doesn't give us peace, but gives us movement, and it's in movement that life happens. Nietzsche invites us finally to dance with desire, without shackles, without illusions. Life isn't about extinguishing lack, but about living fully with it. This is the art of desiring without being slave, transforming restlessness into strength, deficiency into creation, suffering into affirmation of existence itself. Throughout this journey, we've seen that for Nietzsche, desire is always ambiguous. It's born from lack, promises pleasure, but almost always delivers suffering. We live in an endless cycle of wanting, conquering, and returning to desire. We discovered that pleasure is brief, that pain endures, that wanting never ends, and that behind each desire hides a deeper will, that of power. But we also saw that this force doesn't need to be just prison. When recognized, it can be transformed into creative energy, capable of propelling us to a firm life even in its imperfection. Nietzsche doesn't ask us to eliminate desire, because that would mean denying life itself. He invites us to face it head-on, to understand its illusions, and choose to live with it lucidly. Wisdom lies in desiring without being slave, in accepting incompleteness and still making it fertile ground for creation. It's not seeking the impossible peace of final satisfaction, but learning to dance with emptiness, transforming it into movement, intensity, and power. And now, a question remains for you. What desire has imprisoned you most until today? If this reflection touched something within you, share in the comments where you're watching from. Tell us about your experience with your own desires and how they've shaped your life. Which city are you calling home while diving into this philosophical journey with us?